Hi, Greg. Hi, Dolores. How are you guys? Nice to see you here. And Russ, I see you've recorded a like, so I presume you're here too. Please hang out a minute while I do some sharing. It's going crazy. Sorry, this is taking a little bit longer than I thought it would. But I'll be with you in just a minute. Okay, thanks for sharing. When I noticed how many people were here, I see you've done such a good job sharing that there's not much more for me to do. So here I am. And so Dolores says, hi, all. And Greg says, good evening, folks. And Bonnie says, hi, everybody. Margot Shepherd says, hi from Hawaii. Hi from Ashburn, Virginia. Not nearly as glamorous as Hawaii. And Greg says, hello from South Georgia. And Russ says, Joe, what do you and Bonnie do for Thanksgiving? Well, we're going to Alexandria, which is where we used to live, and some friends of ours there have invited us for dinner. They are rather young folks compared to ourselves, and they have two very young children who are very, very cute, and we're going to get to play with them tomorrow, since I believe that our own grandchildren are out of town. So that's a wonderful thing to do. We did it last Thanksgiving, and everybody had a wonderful time. And so we're going back this Thanksgiving, okay, as well. And as for the rest of the weekend, well, I intend to live stream some, certainly on Saturday night and maybe on Friday night too. By the way, I should say, I won't be live streaming tomorrow night. I'm usually scheduled for Thursday, but if you let me, I'm going to take the night off and continue on with what I'm doing. Hi, Sandy Shellis, how are you? And Susan Eldridge has joined. Okay, and Lana says hi from snowy Minneapolis. That's a familiar refrain. Kathy says hi, Joe. Hi, Kathy. Nice to see you. Cheyenne says, and Cheyenne says, hi, Joe. Can't stay long. Asking people on Twitter to send a message to AOC to choose another day for national election holiday. Columbus Day has already been changed in many cities and states to Indigenous Peoples Day. Yes, I think there should be another day for a national election holiday. Maybe we can change Veterans Day to a national election holiday. I don't know. I think we get a lot of pushback on that one. So probably not. Just a thought. And Lana's replying to Sandra. I can't quite see it on my monitor. For some reason, it's being balky. Here it comes. She says, how are you, Sandy? And Susan says, well, I'll get back to the comments, okay, a little later. But what I am going to do now is start with the business of the day. Let's go check on some articles. So it may be a number of you have already seen this. It appeared on November 25th. And there she is, certainly one of our favorite people in Congress. Now, this one was written by Julia Connolly. Originally appeared at Common Dreams, but I picked it up at Truth Dig. And I'm going to look at the clean view of it here. Or I should say the clearly view, sorry. I clicked that twice. And so she held a town hall in the Bronx where she expressed deep frustration with the routine dismissal of investment in public goods as, quote, free stuff, unquote. That, of course, is what you hear from the neoliberals, right? And she said, I never want to hear the term, quote, free stuff, unquote, ever again, unquote. Ocasio-Cortez told her audience. The progressive first-term Democrat explained her vision for newly proposed legislation. The Green New Deal for public housing for $180 billion investment in upgraded public housing that would prioritize communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. It would retrofit the units with energy-efficient insulation and appliances and create 250,000 jobs. The bill is co-sponsored in the Senate by Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and by Jeff Merkley, okay, of Oregon, who, by the way, is a progressive stalwart, okay, in his own right. He doesn't have a flair for the marketing, I think, but he's pretty solid on all of the issues. He's a very, very good senator. Like public roads, schools, and libraries, Ocasio-Cortez said public housing should be recognized as a public good funded by taxpayers. particularly the wealthiest people and corporations. Quote, it's possible, and it's not that we deserve it because it's a handout, unquote, the Congresswoman said. People like to say, quote, oh, this is about free stuff, unquote. This is not about free stuff. These are public goods, unquote. What a great reply, coming straight out of Galbraith the Elder, John Kenneth Galbraith, that is, Jamie's father. Ocasio-Cortez won applause from members of the audience for her plan, including one who shouted of housing, quote, it is a human right, unquote. I see she's educating her constituency, or maybe they're educating her, who knows. And, okay, so anyway, there's a video there that you can tie into, okay, if you like. I'm not going to play it here. It's a very good video, though, of course. It's short, too. From yesterday at AOC had a Green New Deal for Public Housing Town Hall in the Bronx. Quote, it was probably near my old neighborhood, because she comes from a place not too far, okay, from my old neighborhood in the Pelham Parkway area of the Bronx. But anyway, quote, I don't want to hear the term free stuff ever again. I'm already hearing from some of these about neoliberal folks who are trying to flip the script on us, unquote. Now, it's a tweet by David Friedlander on November 25th, 2019. On social media Monday, Ocasio-Cortez said public services for the use of all people, quote, are worth investing in, protecting, and advancing for all society and by future generations. And then another quotation, public education, libraries, and infrastructure policies, which we've had before in America and elsewhere in the world, are not, quote, free stuff, unquote. They are public goods, and they are worth investing in, protecting, and advancing for all society and future generations. Sincerely, New York 14th. And then there's a tweet. There's a Twitter link to a tweet. At Sunday's town hall, Ocasio-Cortez announced the term free stuff, quote unquote, to dismiss our progressive proposals for benefits already available to people in many developed countries as a, quote, neoliberal, unquote, talking point. Quote, I'm already hearing some of these but neoliberal folks are trying to flip the script on us and say, quote, oh, I don't want to pay for a millionaire's kids to go to college, unquote. Unquote. Unquote twice there. She said, the argument makes no sense, Ocasio-Cortez suggested, then saying publicly funded infrastructure unfairly benefits the rich. Quote, I believe all people should be able to go to a public library, she said. Quote again, everyone can drive on our roads. Everybody should be able to send our kids to public school, and every person who needs it should have access to public housing that looks like this, unquote. So a couple of comments on that. First, I'm so happy to see her say that. For years and years and years, no one has said that except for Bernie, maybe. And also, okay, in recent years, I think the origin of the term free stuff, as in other words, the first time I heard things described as free stuff in just that way, with that kind of emphasis on it and used in that kind of slang way, the person who was talking about it was Barack Obama, the quintessential representative of the neoliberal class. He always talked about free stuff. Oh, you want free stuff. You want free stuff. They love to say, there is no free lunch. There is no free lunch with respect to resources. Sure, but with respect to government money, as Stephanie Kelton has often said, we can have nice things. And nice things include all kinds of public goods. Let us never forget that. Let us never forget that lesson again. And thanks to Ocasio-Cortez for saying it in just that particular way. Now, it turns out that the way Ocasio-Cortez is handling herself in Congress seems to be very popular. Jake Johnson has an article also from Common Dreams which says, without dialing for dollars or lobbyist meetings, Ocasio-Cortez raised more money than any other House Democrat in the third quarter. Look at the Clearly view again so you can see it better. And the preamble of the article is, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez raised more money for re-election than any other House Democrat in the third quarter of 2019, an achievement the New York Democrat touted as a testament to the power of grassroots fundraising over schmoozing with corporate lobbyists and healthy executives. And she said, quote, I intentionally built my campaign to rely on small dollar grassroots support without any corporate money because I felt that's the best way to be accountable to everyday people, unquote, said Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The New York Post reported late Tuesday that Ocasio-Cortez raised $1.42 million between July 1 through September 30th for a 2020 election campaign, topping all House Democrats, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, whose fundraising prowess is well known. To be fair to Nancy Pelosi, I think what's being talked about here is the funds that Nancy Pelosi raised for herself for her 2020 reelection. But I'm sure that she's also been raising really big bucks from the donor class for centrist Democrats. And I don't think that's counted in these particular figures. Quote, while many try to belittle a progressive agenda that centers working people and the public good, in truth, it's more powerful than ever, unquote, tweeted Ocasio-Cortez, the lead sponsor of the Green New Deal resolution in the House. Quote, I haven't picked up a phone once this year to dial for dollars. And I don't meet with corporate lobbyists. That is the power of your grassroots support, unquote. I don't think she intends to pick up the phone to dial for dollars. Not this year, not anytime soon. According to the Post, 1.1 million of the 1.42 million Ocasio-Cortez raised in the third quarter came from donations under $200, running a campaign fueled by grassroots support instead of corporate buck-raking. Said Ocasio-Cortez opens up, quote, much more time for me to be fully present at my job. And by the way, we've seen her fully present at her job in her committee meetings, where she's constantly harassing the people who should be harassed and constantly memeing, constantly presenting new memes for progressives to use in arguments. Quote, I intentionally built my campaign to rely on small dollar grassroots support. I stated this before earlier in the preamble, so I'll skip this. But, quote again, it has impacted how I work in Congress in powerful ways I couldn't fully appreciate till I got here. And then, quote, our political system's reliance on huge sums of money has many negative impacts, but one of the largest is that it takes lawmakers time away from lawmaking. Ocasio-Cortez added, and quote again, "That's a feature, not a flaw. The less time lawmakers have, the more special interests can slip in harmful um, um, uh, harmful provisions," unquote. So she's absolutely right about that too. Now, there's something else I wanted to say about that and about her fundraising. The more funds that she can raise, the more funds are likely to find their way into the hands of challengers to the status quo. And I think that applies to Bernie too. In some cases, they're actually sharing fundraisers. Okay, but in other cases, there probably will be some gifts of funds from the Bernie campaign to other campaign and from Ocasio-Cortez's campaign to other campaigns. I don't know whether this is going on as yet, but Ocasio-Cortez is very strongly supporting Jessica Cisneros, who is a progressive candidate who's running in the Texas the 28th district, I believe against Henry Cuellar, who is a fairly young man who is can only be described as a Trumpist. He's a Trumpist. He votes with Trump on the majority of time, okay, on various things. And he takes big money, and he's totally opposed to most of what we want to see, and he's completely out of step with the makeup of his district. And Cisneros, on the other hand, is the same kind of candidate as Ocasio-Cortez. Okay. And not simply because she too is a Hispanic, but also in terms of issue positions, in terms of the things that she cares about, and in terms of the way she pours herself into the campaign and expresses herself. She'll be another terrific recruit for the squad if she can get into the Congress. I believe she's also a Justice Democrat, okay, at this point. But the important thing is that she's really, really progressive, and the person she's running against is one of the worst people in Congress. And she's running the same kind of campaign as Ocasio-Cortez is running and has run, and she's raising money in exactly the same way. And she's another good person to support insofar as we can afford it. But, of course, we will afford as much as we possibly can afford, because I think we all know that this is a fight for survival. And that brings me to my next item, and that is there's another article from Common Dreams called "The Science is Screaming." There's a UN report warns only rapid and transformational action can stave off global climate climate global climate disaster. There, I got over that transition. Oh, by the way, I want to say something about something I heard today. One of the other progressive commentators okay, in the blogosphere or the commentator sphere, but on the progressive end, was saying that such and such was a very a good candidate because he was cognitively fast on the uptake and he showed no sign of cognitive dysfunctions. He had no stutter at all. Okay. I want to inform him that I have been stuttering since I was a little boy. And believe me, that has nothing to do with cognitive dysfunction. Not at all. And when the gentleman involved has had hundreds, of publications over something like 50 years, of writing, then perhaps he might be sufficiently expert, but to be able to pronounce or to imply that people who stutter have a cognitive dysfunction. I'm sure that stuttering is some kind of dysfunction, but I don't think any slowdown or malfunction of cognition is involved. It's not a matter of the cognition. It's a matter of the connection between the cognition and the speech. I'm not in any way trying to defend Joe Biden, who starts what he has to say 3 or 4 different times. In terms of different approaches to what he's saying. Okay, which I think is part of the reason why he happens to be stuttering, at this point, in time. But I'm here to tell you that, generally speaking, stuttering is not a sign of some sort of inability to think or not being as quick on the uptake, as somebody else. In fact, when challenged, when I'm in a debate with somebody, I stutter the least when I'm right in the middle of a conflict, when I have to be cognitively fast on my feet. That's why it's better for people who are in a debate of some kind with me to keep me calm, because I tend to lose my stutter completely when I really get angry. Anyway, I digress. I digress. So let me go on. This was another article by Jake Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Published on November 26th, which was yesterday. An alarming by UN report released Tuesday said global temperatures are on track to rise as much as 3.2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century, meaning only drastic and unprecedented emissions reductions can stave off the most devastating consequences of the climate crisis. Just a little point on this. There's a version of this article that appeared in Truthdig, as well. The title is slightly different, but the article's the same. Except that there, the claim is that the global temperatures are on track to rise as much as 3.9 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. I think that's a misprint. But anyway, I think for the record, this is correct because I checked the link and the link says 3.2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, meaning only drastic and unprecedented emissions reductions can stave off the most devastating consequences of the climate crisis. The annual emissions gap report from the UN Environmental Program, from UNEP, warns that nations' commitments under the Paris Climate Accord, from which U.S. President Donald Trump began formally withdrawing this month, are not nearly sufficient to bring about the widespread changes needed to avert climate catastrophe. To world leaders, we say it is time to stop the expansion of the fossil fuel industry immediately. Not a single new mine can be dug, not another pipeline built, not one more well dropped into the ocean. Unquote. And that was from May Bave at 350.org, which is also Bill McKibben's organization, if I recall correctly. Quote, it is evident that incremental changes will not be enough, and there is a need for rapid and transformational action, unquote, the report states. And quote again, by necessity, this will see profound changes in how energy, food, and other material-intensive services are demanded and provided by governments, businesses, and markets. According to the report, produced by an international team of leading scientists and researchers, greenhouse gas emissions must begin falling 7.6% annually by 2020 to prevent global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2030. By the way, that can only be done, I think, by combining any reductions in emissions with our drawing down of the carbon that is already in the air. So we really need to get to that with the kind of agriculture that sequesters the carbon in the soil once again, where it came from. Quote, our collective failure to act early and hard on climate change means we now must have to deliver deep cuts to emissions, unquote. Inger Anderson, UNEP's executive director, said in a statement, quote, this shows that countries simply cannot wait till the end of 2020 when new climate commitments are due to step up action. They and every city, region, business, and individual need to act now, unquote. Okay, by the way, one reason why I've been for the quick impeachment of Trump is because of this. There would be a much better chance that we in the United States would be able to embark on some action involving cuts to emissions and drawing carbon out of the air before the end of 2020, if we could get Trump out. Now, I know Pence is very, very bad, okay, as well. I certainly recognize that. But I think a good, solid impeachment of Trump on a broad range of grounds with a conviction by the Senate would change the atmosphere in this country. It would change the atmosphere. But impeachment is a political process. The public has to be won over to that particular process. Right now, it is not being won over to the... Instead of actually being won over, what is happening is that the polls are beginning to turn the other way now. Why? Because the Ukrainian impeachment is bullshit. Not because there wasn't an infraction there. There was a violation of the Constitution there. There's no question about it. But in the public mind, that violation of the Constitution was a minor piece of hoo-ha. It wasn't anything really serious. The case has to be made, as it was with Nixon. The case has to be made that there's a violation here, there's a violation there, there's a violation, there's a violation, there's a violation there, that there are violations everywhere. That the President of the United States is, in fact, a criminal. That case has to be made. It has to be made from a political point of view, because impeachment is a political process. Now, I know we're trying to transcend the idea that it's a partisan process where only Democrats are involved. But political and partisan are not the same thing. Impeachment is a fundamentally political process. The president needs to be impeached on grounds that are political so that the political fight over impeachment can be won. Right now, Pelosi and the Democrats are losing it. Because when it comes to moving the public, Nancy Pelosi is an incompetent politician. She doesn't know how to move the public. She knows how to raise a lot of funds. She knows how to play a lot of games. She knows how to win things on a marginal basis. She knows how to bring money to campaigns. But she doesn't know how to move the masses. She can't do that. Quote, "We need to catch up on the years in which we procrastinated," Anderson said. "If we don't do this, the 1.5 Celsius goal will be out of reach before 2030. She's dead right. And then the kind of suffering we're seeing now is just going to be exacerbated further and further and further. The emissions gap report comes just a day after the UN's World, the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, reported that levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere reached a record high in 2018. "There has never been a more important time to listen to the science," unquote. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in a statement on Tuesday, quote, "Failure to heed these warnings and take drastic action to reverse emissions means we will continue to witness deadly and catastrophic heat waves, storms, and pollution." And what May Bave of 350.org had to say was that the new report show, quote, "The science is screaming," unquote. To world leaders, we say it is time to stop the expansion of the fossil fuel industry immediately. And then that quote I read to you before about not a single new mine and so on. And we have to get to work immediately transitioning to sustainable renewable energy powered energy systems, unquote. And quote again, "Across the globe, resistance to fossil fuels is rising. The climate strikes have shown the world that we are prepared to take action," said Bave. "Going forward, people will keep up a steady drumbeat of action, strikes, and protests that get louder and louder throughout 2020. But the government's attending COP25 in Madrid. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. The world has woken up to the reality of climate breakdown." The UN Environmental Program messaging had erroneously stated global temperatures are on track to rise as much as 3.9 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. The accurate figure is 3.2 degrees Celsius. So that's where the 3.9 figure actually came from. What you're looking at here is a corrected post on Common Dreams, and Truthdig evidently picked up 3.9 figure from the original Common Dreams version, okay, of this. There was one more article that I wanted to go over, at least a part of it, because it's real good. Okay, and it fits in. Among the important reasons for impeaching Trump is maybe Pence, as a caretaker president, will be afraid of increasing the climate devastation anymore. I think Pence is a rather timid man when faced with a lot, of opposition. And with Trump gone, the opposition is likely to be much and much stronger to any reactionary things that he may want to do. And he'll be a caretaker president anyway. He can't possibly mount a campaign. But during this period of time, if he does, he would just be swept away. I don't think he's going to bother doing that. So, this article is called "Are Democrats Impeaching Trump for the Wrong Crimes?" And the article is basically a transcript of an interview that appeared on the Real News Network. The conversation was between the author and activist David Swanson. It's not David Sampson. That's a misprint. It's David Swanson. He's a professor at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And he's a very, very good writer and a peace activist, and also strong in the Green Party. Okay, he's really an excellent person, and he had some very wise words on impeachment here. Mark Steiner, who's an excellent interviewer, has a very good conversation with him. There was a little back and forth in this particular conversation because Steiner is not the kind of interviewer who is simply passive. He actually has a conversation. It's a two-way conversation. Okay. So you see, David Swanson is the author, activist, co-founder of War is a Crime, whose work can be found on his website, davidswanson.org. Let's try democracy. And so Steiner welcomes Swanson. They start talking about the quid pro quo. A bunch of clips of pay are played for the audience to see and for David Swanson to see. And there's a bunch of, real baloney about what's going on in terms of the Ukraine situation. Steiner says, "I said earlier in the opening, many folks are arguing that I talked to that there's a kind of no smoking gun there, but there is something there." So give us your analysis of that. And Swanson immediately starts off with the point, "If I were impeaching Trump and removing him from office, I'd be impeaching him for perhaps the few worst impeachable offenses. If I were going to do a complete list, I would get through hundreds before I got to Ukraine Gate." Mark Steiner says, "Where would you start?" Well, for one thing, look how ludicrous it is for there to be any doubt, any question whether Trump is guilty of an offense when this is someone who from day one has been guilty of violating both of the emoluments clauses with levels of corruption and types of corruption never before seen in the White House. Literally, thousands of conflicts of interest in violation of the U.S. Constitution, and there's not any question whether those facts exist or not. This is a president who has pardoned a racist, the murderous sheriff in Arizona has told the border guards, quote, commit crimes, I'll pardon you, unquote, who has pardoned horrible crimes. There's not a question, quote, did he issue these pardons or didn't he? He did. He did. I added the second he did. You take a president who has engaged in numerous illegal wars, escalated, several of them escalated drone murders. Yes, the wars are illegal from an international law point of view and from the point of view of the treaties that the United States has signed and that are still in place. Keep that in mind. Otherwise, it may be so hard for you to believe that these are illegal wars because he's fighting so many of them at the same time and nobody's been calling him to account for it. Escalated drone murders, threatened a nuclear war against two countries, supported coups in Venezuela, Bolivia, etc., and then you impeach him exclusively for failing to escalate a war in Ukraine with Russia. That's a sort of insanity that our system is dealing with. I mean, a president who takes children away from families, who publicly incites racist violence, who declares official emergencies explicitly in violation of congressional policies to spend funds he's not allowed to spend. This is a president openly engaged in intentionally exacerbating climate collapse, and none of this is brought in. David Swanson and myself are both totally disgusted. So Mark Steiner sort of pushes back, but the question I have, I hear what you're saying, and especially what you first iterated when you talked about the emolument clause issues. Those, I think, many of us would argue back that those were impeachable offenses. The rest of most of what you talked about were things you can oppose politically, but they're not necessarily impeachable offenses, even in partisan warfare. Sometimes people use the argument you couldn't take Al Capone down for all the criminality he did, so you took him down on his income taxes. Don't people have to? People who are going after him are going after him because this is the way they think they can get him? David Swanson replied by saying, well, the reason that the precedent is they got Nixon on his income taxes rather than on Vietnam, and they got Clinton on lying about sex rather than on his wars and his various outrages, that's congressional choice. I don't think they got Nixon on his income taxes. I think they got him on a Watergate burglary, right? Except he was never impeached. He resigned before he was going to be impeached. Anyway, that's not something written into the Constitution. You can impeach Donald Trump for what you choose to impeach him for. And if you and I and the most people can agree on the emoluments clauses, why is it that the Democratic leadership can't? And why not impeach him a couple of years back? Why wait until now? Because very clearly, the purpose is not to halt his outrages. It's not to stop his destruction of the climate or anything else by getting him on his income taxes. It's to make him look bad slowly, keep him in office, not risk removing him, and run in an election against damaged goods. This is the thinking from people who are 24/7, 365 days a year, obsessed with elections, not with protecting us from a criminal president. That was a good statement, wasn't it? Mark Steiner then comes back. But also, before I show this next clip, also, they couldn't really do anything until this Congress. When Democrats actually had a majority, then they could do it. It wouldn't have happened before that anyway. I mean, it could only happen now. The question is, part of the argument that people have been having back and forth, if constitutionally it's not easy to impeach a president, they have to really do something that is impeachable. And so folks can argue this is the first time they had a chance to do that, but that's something you say is wrong. There was no question mark on that, but perhaps they should have been. David Swanson says, well, first of all, partisanship is also a choice. Past impeachments have not been strictly partisan. There is no reason you can't move an impeachment from the minority or in a split Congress. But the Democrats have had the majority since the beginning of this year. Okay, at this point, I want to stop this, okay, and I want to point out there is no reason you can't move an impeachment from the minority or in a split Congress. You can move it. You can start to fight the political battle over it. Al Green introduced his resolution to impeach a long time ago. It was poo-pooed and ignored. Okay, the Democrats didn't have to ignore it. They could have introduced an impeachment resolution the first day he was in office and kept after him every single day after that, with each violation of the Constitution, with each ground for impeachment. They could have had the party officially, the party in Congress, officially keeping a list of all the impeachable offenses of Donald Trump. That could be in the congressional record right now if Nancy Pelosi had wanted it to be. But instead, she decided to play footsie with Trump at various times. The resistance. What resistance? But the Democrats have had the majority since the beginning of this year. And here we are, many months later, says David. And they're dealing with something they haven't quite proved to everyone's satisfaction, instead of quintessentially indisputable. And I mean, when Congress says, quote, you cannot have this money for this wall, unquote, and Trump says, quote, I'll declare a phony emergency in order to take it anyway, unquote. What is Congress supposed to do? There is not an option for Congress other than impeachment. And they choose not to impeach over all of these offenses that are just beyond dispute, public acts, and they go after something that's secret. Look how annoyed they were when the next day after they raised this issue, Trump publicly asked China to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, and that just about ruined everything for them because it was public. They want something secret. They want something they can dig after. It takes longer. It leaves doubt, and it avoids a conviction in the Senate. So David Swanson is suggesting that Nancy Pelosi and a lot of the Democratic leadership never wanted and do not want now to get a conviction in the Senate. They don't want a conviction in the Senate right now. What they want to do is run against Trump as damaged goods. Why would they want that? Because they want to have Joe Biden or some other centrist get elected because Trump is so terrible, without having to support somebody like Bernie Sanders, who is running on the issues and who is saying, yeah, Trump is terrible. He's very terrible. But that's not why you should vote for me. You should vote for me because here is my platform, and this is what I'm going to do for America. And this is what's going to happen if you support me and what it's going to mean for your lives. It's just a side benefit that you'll no longer have Trump. Just a side benefit. Mark Steiner says, well, there probably would never be a conviction in the Senate given how the Senate is controlled. That's not going to happen, no matter what. As Trump famously said, quote, I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody's going to do anything, unquote. The Senate is not going to convict him. And this whole impeachment, Swanson interrupts and says, if you held effective, persuasive public hearings on indisputable, impeachable offenses, including separating kids from their parents and locking them in cages, including the financial corruption, profiting from the office of the presidency, and went through 30 or 40 of them and watched Trump's ratings plummet through the process. Yeah, after each one, or each set, after each three, or each four, his rating would plummet through the process. I wouldn't swear you couldn't get a conviction. Neither would I. I think you could get a conviction. Swanson says, yes, it's unlikely. It's not impossible. And the steps to make it more likely are not being taken. Mark Steiner says, well, let's move on to this other thing. That's a really interesting argument to be had. I don't have the faith that the far right is going to convict him and push him out when they can use Trump so easily to fill up the courts and do what they need to in this country. I think he should have said, and do what they need to do to this country. But all right. I don't think they're going to come along with liberal, progressive, or radical Democrats, whoever they may be, or take their boy out when their boy is doing their bidding. I think that's, and David interrupts again, they take their boy out when there's a risk of the public taking them out. And that requires a better impeachment campaign than what we're seeing right now. That was on point, boy. Swanson really delivered that one. Mark says, let's talk about this impeachment campaign. Let's just kind of pick it apart a bit. Let's look at this. This is a clip. Fiona Hill talking about John Bolton. We'll start with this one and look at another one because they're both around the same kind of issue. And so there's a question asked of Dr. Hill. Was it apparent to you that when President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, or anyone else was pushing for an investigation into Burisma, that the reason why they wanted that investigation related to what President Trump said here, the Bidens, unquote? Hill says, yes, that was what Giuliani intended. Anyway, I'm not going to read through all this because... Anyway, the Fiona Hill testimony, which made everybody think in Congress this was the smoking gun that they had Trump. So then Steiner says, so that's the first part. Let me just play the second part real fast for all of us so we can kind of look at that and see what you think. If there's a there. This has to do with the piece that many people think where Fiona Hill fried him. We'll see if that's correct. And Fiona Hill says, I will say for the record that the president has a perfect right to remove any ambassador at any time for any reason. Then on the second front, it was very clear at this point that there was, let's just say, a different channel in operation in relations to Ukraine, one that was domestic and political in nature, and that was very different from the channel or the loop, however you like it, that I and my colleagues were in. We were focused on bilateral relations and the U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine. And these two things had diverged at this point. And then Mark Steiner says, so as many people have written that, something K is inaudible there, it's probably something like that. Here we find a smoking gun. But so, what do you think of this testimony, David? I mean, is it convincing? Does it point to an interaction? Or from your analysis, does it not? David Swanson says, it's certainly convincing enough for an indictment, which is what an impeachment is, and then you go to trial in the Senate. I mean, that level of proof has been reached. There's no question. My concern is, number one, that you're getting Al Capone on something much less than his tax returns, and that this is being used to push Russiagate and to pretend that Ukrainegate didn't replace a failed Russiagate that stalled impeachment for years, but rather is being piled on top of it as if it had been proven, and the damage that does to international relations and to the U.S. public's thinking about foreign policy. Those are my concerns with this, but certainly this is sufficient to impeach somebody in that office, and were that a president who wasn't Donald Trump, and this was the worst thing that he or she was doing, I think it would be grounds for impeachment. Mark says, but clearly it's not the worst thing he's done. I mean, I think that we're in total agreement about this. The question is, where will this take all of this? And I think some of the troubling things that some people will have with this, and this is an interesting piece, This is Fiona Hill in her opening statement, where she's talking about the foreign policy issues in Ukraine and Russia. This is very telling, but let's talk about this is what Jeet here in his piece in a Nation kind of really focused on. One of Steiner's favorite people is Jeet here, who is a very perspicacious commentator from the Nation. But Fiona Hills had said in this clip that he's now playing, I take pride in the fact that I'm a nonpartisan foreign policy expert who has served under 3 Republican and Democratic presidents. I have no interest in advancing the outcome of your inquiry in any particular direction except toward the truth. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. No concrete evidence has yet surfaced as to this. There's no smoking gun about this. The impacts of the successful 2016 Russia campaign remains evident to today. So Fiona Hill buys the Russiagate BS. Our nation is being torn apart. Truth is questioned. A highly professional and expert career foreign service is being undermined. So that is really Trump's crime here. He's undermining a highly professional and expert career foreign service, says the highly professional and expert Fiona Hill, who is evidently about to swear on her life that Russia was the foreign power that determined the outcome of our 2016 elections, rather than Hillary's failure to campaign at the last in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Right? Jesus. Mark Steiner. So, I mean, what hit me about this particular piece, and let's talk about this for a moment, because this is clearly in the impeachment inquiry, but it says something much larger when Dr. Fiona Hill said she was not a partisan. But clearly, in this statement and in her pushing this was a very partisan statement that comes across party lines about what they want to confront and how they want to confront it. David Swanson says, well, anyone can declare that they're honest and unbiased and speak only the truth and then make their assertions. But these are unproven assertions that the U.S. government put everything it had into proving for years and came up short. And here they're being slipped into an impeachment hearing about a different topic that they're pursuing because there is more evidence related to it. And so that's a problem with this whole impeachment hearing. As I said, that they're bringing Russiagate into it as if that hadn't been the major failure that actually delayed this impeachment for years. And it's just ludicrous. The United States has an election system that put Trump in office with fewer votes than his opponent. That is just completely corrupted by corporate media and by money, by bribery that's been legalized, that has gerrymandering and racist stripping of people from voting rolls and long lines and ID requirements that deny people the vote. It's just broken in dozens of ways. And to explain that Russia has somehow systematically assaulted this pristine democratic system by buying a handful of weird Facebook ads that didn't convince anybody to do anything, I mean, it's just ludicrous. I thought that was a wonderful statement by David Swanson. Just perfect. But it goes to the partisan motivation here, which is to blame Russia for the last election, which far outweighs any motivation related to doing people's jobs as Congress members or protecting us from a criminal and abusive presidency. Then Mark says, so David, talk about, from your perspective politically and from a left and progressive perspective, where do you think this takes us? So the impeachment is going to happen, and then there's something inaudible. It's probably go to the judiciary. They'll probably convict. It'll go to the Senate. I don't know what the judiciary has to do with, but to the Judiciary Committee. The impeachment is going to happen, and he's saying that he's probably saying, that the report from the Intelligence Committee is going to go to the Judiciary Committee. They'll probably convict. It'll go to the Senate. So politically, where does this move us? How does this move the ball? And remember, impeachment is a political process, and if you're going to win over the American people, it has to be politically effective. Swanson then says, I think it moves the U.S. public towards an ever more militant, anti Russian, pro weapons dealing foreign policy, regardless of partisanship. I don't think it accomplishes very well the goal of making Joe Biden look good. That's been another ... The purpose here is to blame Russia, make Trump look bad, and make Biden look good. I think it leaves things pretty much where they were in that regard because there won't be a conviction, almost certainly, unless they expand the impeachment to include more persuasive charges. And you end up with a similar election to what you would have had before for people who are intent on doing everything to manipulate the upcoming election. So I think the Democrats would be better off thinking less about the next election, doing their jobs, doing them seriously, and would find in the end that they actually benefited from that in the next election. Mark Steiner says, yeah, I guess one place where we're not quite on the same line here is that I'm not very sanguine about the idea that the Republican-controlled Senate would ever impeach Trump because he does their bidding and does it so well in terms of what he's done in this country so far around the court system and more. But that's a debate we could have. We could see how this unfolds if that even gets to that point. But the overall picture here, it just seems that the impeachment, and some people would argue that it would have been stronger for Democrats in the House to go after him piece by piece and censure him for all these things that they might not be able to find enough to impeach him on, that can expose the underbelly of what's happened to this country via Trump. See, and here's where I want him impeached. It's for things that you don't have anything on. When he declares a ban on Muslim and enacts that policy, it's a public act. When he takes actions to incite racist violence with his voice and with his Twitter feed, these are public acts. You don't have to go find anything. When he declares the United States is engaged in a war in Syria exclusively to steal that country's oil, you don't have to go find anything. He's stating that publicly. He's laying that out before you on a silver platter. But you don't want it. You shove it away. And that we must go find something that needs more investigation in hopes that we can investigate it and never get to the bottom of it, but still make him look bad or censure him. And then David says, I want him impeached and removed from office for public acts that are beyond dispute. And Mark Steiner says, well, we'll see how this unfolds for us in the coming weeks and months. I look forward to getting you back here to talk about this because really, to me, one of the most important issues here is how people on the left and how progressives and others in this country confront what we're being confronted by with this Trump administration and what the response should be wherever this impeachment goes. But I appreciate your work in writing, David, and always good to have you with us, David Swanson. We'll have you back very soon, and we'll see where this goes. And David says, same to you. Thanks, Mark. And Mark says, take care, my friend. And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Thank you all for joining us. Please let us know what you think. There'll be more of this, unfortunately. We'll have to keep showing you and talking about it and finding out where this takes us as a nation. Take care. And then there's the video for you to watch, okay, if you would like to do that. It's a very good video. I hope I did it but justice in my reading of it and my commentary on it here today. So let's see. I think I'm in the wrong place right now. Let me go see your comments and questions. Ooh, like Buffalo was. 62 yesterday. Buffalo, was it 62 yesterday? It was colder here. 62 yesterday, Western New York. And let's see. Jeff Ginter's joined. Steve Wolfbrand says it's been raining in Los Angeles. And Cheyenne says good for AOC. Sandra Amy says hi, Steve. Sandra Amy is Sandy Shellis, everybody. Kathy Langan, rainy and windy with some snow in West Michigan. And Steve Wolfbrand says love AOC. Yeah, obviously I do too, right? And Steve says hi, Sandra. Margot says winter is coming to Hawaii. The temp might go down 1 degree. Okay, and Lana says our storm now moved to your area. Uh, she said this to Kathy. Happy Thanksgiving. By the way, everybody, happy Thanksgiving. This, of course, is the pre-Thanksgiving show. Kathy replies, okay. And Cheyenne says, invite your friends to new Facebook group. Boycott MSNBC. Thanks. And Lana replying to Margot says, oh, shut up. Oh, that was over the temperature going down by 1 degree in Hawaii. I don't know why I don't know why my view has failed to change. I've been at least, I changed my screen at least 3 minutes ago, and this stubbornly refuses to change. So I'm going to try it once again. Please excuse me. I think I'm reading these comments backwards. Steve says tax the rich. And Kay Clark Ryan is here. Hi, Kay. And Barbara Wernig. AOC's responses are the best. I love listening to her. So do I. AOC knows MMT. I know she does. And so does Andres Bernal, who is one of her chief advisors, I believe. And Lana says, yeah, that was my lame Senator Amy Klobuchar. Quote, rich kids getting free college. So lame. Her campaign motto should be, quote, no, we can't. Oh, gee, Lana, I thought that was her campaign motto. Steve says, cut the military-industrial complex budget. We have enough money to pay for it all. Yes, we control the money. Or we would control the money. Right now, we don't. They control the money. Margot says, we have enough money without touching any budget. What we don't have is congressional will, which means, of course, that to get congressional will, we have to replace much of the Congress. Much of the Congress. I suspect, though, if we replace 25% of the Congress, that the rest that we need for a majority will fall in line. Some comments on stuttering I see here. I'll get to those in a minute. Savage Joy with Texas CD25 candidate Heidi Sloan. Cool. And somebody says, Steve says, we don't mind your occasional stutter. Thank you, Steve. And Lena said, I thought it was a neurological disorder, stuttering. Well, it's something that some people have a neurological tendency to stutter. It's something that's to some degree inherited, okay, in families. My father used to tell me, actually when I was young, that he stuttered as a boy as well. But I never heard him stutter in my life. In other words, he had somehow managed to stop stuttering. Okay, I don't know how. But I've had certain experiences, okay, of my own. In the 1970s, I went to a speech therapist, okay, in the New York area called Dr. Martin Schwartz. And he was developing a theory. He was developing a therapy that he was using at the time. And I took that therapy, and it was very effective for me. And I followed up training myself to always talk in the way that we were trained to do, okay, in the therapy. And for many years, it worked for me. It worked to make me far more comfortable. Okay, I hardly ever stuttered. In all the characteristic situations that I was stuttering, like in public speaking, okay, being on telephone, things like that, I was no longer stuttering. It stopped. Okay, I between 1981 okay, and 91, okay, I ran a computer hardware firm, okay, a small business. I was constantly on the phone, and I was selling constantly, and I turned out to be a very good salesman. I was never very good as a marketer, but I was a hell of a salesman. I was great, okay, at closing deals without actually pressuring. I used, I listened very well, and I did soft sales, consulting sales, okay, essentially. But I was very good at that. I was probably the best salesperson in my company, and there were two or three others who were very, very good salespersons. But uh, then I got into other things, okay, and still, okay, I never stuttered. And then it must have been maybe 10 years ago or so, it started to slowly come back. And okay, I don't know why it started to come back, but it did. And since then, I've been fighting it. When I first began to live stream constantly, I think I was doing it more than I am now. I have the feeling in the last month or two, it has started to go away again. I think I'm unconsciously beginning to breathe again in the same way that I did when I was going through the training for the therapy. Uh, I would actually do the therapy again if I could, but unfortunately, I have neither the time nor the money to do it. But right now, it takes about a week to go through the therapy, and then you have to constantly practice as well. And I had the time some time ago, but I don't feel that it's really much of a disability now. It seems to me my live streaming is pretty fluent, so I'm going to stick with it as long as it's not actually crippling for me. So, Obama, yeah, we got into Obama. My brother Hal has joined. Hi, Hal. I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, here you are. Distracting the public now with impeachment now is a distraction of all criminal activities, not just Trump, okay, but Dems. That's true, Barbara, with the kind of impeachment that they're doing. If we could pressure them into broadening the grounds, okay, of impeachment, uh, it would expose also some criminal activities that the Democrats had engaged in, but not activities that would prevent some of the progressive Democrats from winning, okay, in this election. But of course, that's exactly what the party doesn't want to facilitate. That's what's going on. And I'm sorry, I don't have good control over the comments here tonight. But thank you for all of them, by the way. Russ asked, does the cerebellum have an influence in speech production? I think it must, but I don't know for sure. Certainly, the vocal cords, okay, are involved. There's some people who have a greater tendency than others to lock their vocal cords up, to get speech blocks. And then, in order to avoid the blocks, they adopt all other kinds, okay, of mannerisms of speech. Word substitution is a favorite thing for stutterers to use to stop the stutter. In other words, when you can't say a particular word, maybe you can say another one that means the same thing. So you do a lot of word substitution. Once I was very good at word substitution, like in graduate school, I was extremely good. I hadn't yet taken the therapy, but I was very good at word substitution. So I almost never stuttered, okay, in graduate school, uh, in class, okay, or anywhere else. I think there were very few people who knew I stuttered, okay, at that time. And Steve said, on the other hand, Joe Biden is definitely losing his mental abilities. I think he is, but I don't think it has anything to do with his stutter. I think he's just losing his mental abilities. Some people use their mental, actually lose, okay, their mental abilities due to, advancing age. For some of us, okay, of advanced age, we lose, okay, our mental abilities. Uh, okay, I don't see that happening to me very well. Whenever I have to do difficult kinds of thinking, as in deep philosophical thinking or something like that, which I'm doing to help out, okay, a friend of mine. Uh, we have a lot of talks in the value theory area about how you test value theories. And we formulated, okay, an approach that builds on, okay, an earlier approach of mine that deals with the value theory, okay, which is actually objectivist. And over this past week, we had to work out some philosophical questions in that area, which are pretty deep. And I found I could do that just as well as I could before. And Cheyenne says, bingo. Every once in a while, my scroll bar here is freezing up. Somebody mentioned the King's Speech. Yeah, I saw that movie. Great movie. Of course, I loved it. But the kind of therapy the King used was dated, actually, by the time I took my therapy. It was something that worked for some people. It certainly worked for his speech. Hey, Rob, how you doing? Charles Kondak has joined. Steve Wolfbrand says, no more middle ground. The time is now. Yeah, the time is now. We have to start surviving now. And Rob says that Obama has said that he would intervene in the primary if he felt that Bernie was running away with the nomination. My thoughts on this ego-driven jerk that is more worried about his legacy. My thoughts are probably the same as yours. I think Obama was a terrible president. I was on his butt from the opening months of 2009 until he left the presidency for the terrible things that he was doing. I mostly focused in uh, the healthcare area, and also on fiscal questions, of course. I didn't write too much in the foreign policy area, at that time. But occasionally, I did some things, in that area. But I was just in a constant state of fury, when he was the president. Only slightly less intense than the constant state of fury that I'm in now during Trump's abortive presidency. But I think I had a greater tolerance for not going absolutely crazy during Trump's presidency because I had practice. I mean, I had seen the Reagan presidency. I saw the Bush 41 presidency. I saw Bill Clinton's presidency. I saw the Bush 43 presidency. And then the Obama presidency, which was only slightly better, in my view, than the Bush presidency. Only very slightly better. It was worse, at one level. The lying, in the Bush presidency was not as competent as the lying in the Obama presidency. Obama lied in very subtle ways that were somewhat hard for people to pick up. I think that when he left as president, there were very few people who thought that he was a liar. But I could pick up his lies from the very first month of the presidency. And I was just disgusted with him from that time on. Anyway, if he rears his ugly head, I guess I shouldn't have said that, but That was sort of comes from the idea that the snake who rears, okay, his ugly head. Actually, one of the things about, okay, Obama that was most advantageous to him is that he didn't at all have an ugly head. That was what disarmed people. He was a person who looked like he kept in shape. He had a ready smile. He could be charming. He was very, very smooth. So Rob says he thinks it's pure jealousy. Yeah, yeah, pure jealousy. He's jealous of what Bernie Sanders might do. Mana says that Nancy Pelosi did this on purpose. She wants to give the false impression that she is against Trump, okay, and it's an act. I think to a great extent, yes, okay, it is an act. Of course, she'd prefer to have Obama back as president. She'd prefer to have Joe Biden back, okay, as president. But as long as Trump is there, okay, as president, she probably figures she can stay the Speaker of the House. And even when she can't, she can get favors from the next speaker, and she can get richer and richer and richer, which seems to be her only objective in life. Oh, but right now, Steve says, I watched my mother die of Alzheimer's, and I can assure you Biden will be a mess in 4 years. Yeah, I suspect that that's true too. Russ says Biden seems to lose his place in thought tracking. This is typical in dementia patients. I know. I believe it's true. Steve says, love how you address our comments at the end. It's truly a great show. Thank you, Steve. I love the comments at the end. I just love, I could go on with this all night, except that too many of you are leaving. Steve said, I had a boss who stuttered. He interviewed a job applicant who stuttered. I told them to sing it to each other. Yeah, that's a weird thing about stuttering. When you sing, you don't stutter. When you sing, it is impossible to stutter. Can you hear the people sing, singing the song of angry men? Bonnie says, Joey, TDS is a waste. He's a symptom, not a cause. He may be a waste, and he may be a symptom, but causes can be symptoms. Symptoms can be causes too. We live in a multi-causal world with all kinds of feedbacks and complex causation going on. So the symptoms can be causes in themselves. That's the problem. Authoritarianism tends to give rise to more authoritarianism. It's a problem. Steve says Joe and Hunter Biden are guilty. HRC and Obama as well. Ukraine was a cesspool. All their hands are dirty. Yeah, I completely agree. All their hands are dirty. Have I missed anybody's comment? I don't know. Steve says, damn, you sing well. I don't think Bonnie thinks I sing well. Yeah, Bonnie says I don't do a whole sentence. My friend Nancy from Switzerland. Well, She's back. She returned here, and she lives in the same development that we do. In fact, we help her to get an apartment. So she's back. She's still trying to raise funds for her the Reinventing Democracy project, but uh, it still goes along, and she is very dedicated to it. She spends all her time on that, essentially. And I wish her great success, of course. But I am now devoting myself to live streaming and to trying to make us successful right now. I can't really take the time out to help her very much. But I will say this: if she had been able to get funding for her project 4 years ago, if you think Bernie is flying now, believe me, he'd be running away with the nomination now, because there would be a progressive movement that would curl their hair in place. If you think we're putting pressure on Congress now, the kind of pressure we'd be putting on Congress with our global social network in place would curl their hair. It just would curl their hair. Steve says, I believe Obama was chosen at a young age by the deep state. The girls are not theirs, and Michelle might not be female, but that's too heavy for this show. Steve, I think that's going a little too far. But I think Obama was chosen back in 2007 by Bob Rubin. I think that happened. And I think at that point, Wall Street had decided to support him, and that he became their candidate actually right then. And when the public option became a thing, later on in 2007, 2008, he was introduced to the public option as the trick sparkle pony that can be used to get the progressives off the Medicare for All horse. And it was because of what happened in connection with the public option that we didn't get a Medicare for All bill passed in 2009. Nancy might want to work with John Roberts Brakey. I don't know who that is, Nancy. Maybe I sorry, Lana. I don't know who John Roberts Brakey is. If you could send me some links, Lana, I would greatly appreciate it. Well, okay, I'm going to remind everybody that to please share, like, and subscribe the video when it goes up shortly after we sign off here. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I would really appreciate it if you could spare a few bucks for me. Thank you. I will check in with any further comments that you may have. I see there are 9 of you still here. That's an increase of 1 from when I last looked. So maybe some of you still have some more comments. Yes, good night, Steve, and happy Thanksgiving to you, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Have a wonderful day tomorrow, and if you're off on Friday as well, have a great day then, and for the whole weekend. Many people who make a whole weekend of it. I will be back certainly on Saturday. I may be back on Friday night as well, depending upon how things work out. Okay, for the rest of the weekend. Um, Steve says the show is great. Well, thank you, Steve. And thank you, everyone. I don't see any additional comments, so okay. I am going to sign off. And I'll see you later.